Hey everyone, it's Dr. H, your friendly wargame guy at the Air Command and Staff College. We're going to talk about land movement, which is a little complicated, but hopefully at the end of this it'll be quite demystified. So, each unit, in fact, let's go and look at a unit really quickly. We've talked a little about it. Each unit is going to have different. There we go. Each unit's going to have as its last rating movement value. This is the number of movement points that it has per movement phase. So if you've got a bunch of movement phases, you get that many movement points per phase. Very important you remember that. It's not per turn. We're not asking you to try to, oh man, how do I keep track of like 8 movement points over 4 phases? It's per phase. You'll also notice that it's color coded. That tells you the type of movement that you can do. So if I come back here to the handy dandy terrain effects chart, which I have downloaded and blown up to make it even more obvious what we're doing here, each hex costs a certain amount of movement points to enter. So remember that hexes have terrain types and terrain features. So we'll start with the terrain type, and then we're going to read over to what type of movement you have, right? And keep in mind, right, leg, mountain, light infantry, motorized, and mechanized. And that'll tell you exactly how much it costs each terrain hex to enter. Now note, this can be modified by features, particularly roads and highways. So knowing what roads and highways look like is really important to understanding movement, because roads and highways can change how much it costs to enter a hex. Also, if you're crossing a minor river, big deal. If you're going into a jungle, big deal. So those are going to add movement value to whatever the hex is. So for example, right, let's say I have a plains and I'm walking there with my leg infantry unit. Normally that would cost me 1 point, but it's got jungle in it. It's plains plus jungle. So I'm going to read down jungle and notice +1. It's actually going to cost me 2 movement points to enter that hex. If I don't have the movement points to enter a hex, I can't enter it. So if I've burned 7 and I went into that plains jungle hex, I can't do it because that would take me to 9 and I only have 8. Let me rephrase that. If I have 8 total movement points and I've used 7, I can't enter that plains jungle hex. It's going to cost me 2. Right? So, as you can see, right, we start hitting, there are some features that make it prohibited. Some features that don't affect movement at all, right? So it's important to keep that in mind. Keep in mind too, weather also matters, right? Storm, harder for everybody to move, and so that's reflected here, right? So some terms will have storm weather, and it'll be harder to move, or even prohibited to move into some places that you normally could move. So that's the basic idea. Let me show you a quick example of what I'm talking about here. If I can load up the Korea map really quickly. There we go. All right, so just to give you some examples of what I'm talking about here, right? We have over here, we got a bunch of DPRK units that are trying to move. Sorry, I have to work around Archimedes, who has decided to stick his face in front of the monitor. So we want to move, so let's say we want to move this guy, and we want to move him to this mountain hex. That sounds exciting. So we can look and see, he's a leg unit, right? So he's got a leg value. I'm going to come here to my terrain effects chart, and give me 1 sec here. All right, so I can read here, right? Legs over here. I'm going to read down to where mountain is. Okay, mountain, leg. That's going to be 4 movement points. That's a lot, but that's actually a lot. That's my entire movement, right? So I can move 1 hex. Note that I can always move 1 hex, no matter how much it's going to cost me, unless it's prohibited. So if I had 4 movement value, and that was the only hex I was moving into, it's going to cost me 5. That's the only hex I move into this phase. However, if I come back here and I want to move into this hex, you can see I actually have a road there. Now, it's not a great road. It's a secondary road. But if I look again at my terrain effects charts, just here, and I go down to secondary road, right? I have the pictograms that match up. And it's secondary road, and that is going to give me a total movement value of 1. So all of my movement, 4 points to move into a mountain hex without a road, but 1 movement point, meaning I have 3 left over if I want to move into another, if I want to move into a that hex with a road. Now note, right, that hex is going to be in the zone of control of a unit. So I also have to add in an additional point because that's how much it costs extra to move into zones of control. So, right, that's actually going to cost me 2 movement points to move into that hex. 2 is less than 4. I have 2 movement points left. That's going to mean, though, I can't move to this next door. That's going to cost me more movement. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's going to be more movement, right? Zone of control plus 1. I know that's going to cost me more than 1 just to move there, right? So I can move from here to here, but I can't make it here, right? Because that's going to cost more movement. But let's move this let's move the South Korean unit out of the way for a second. No. There we go. Right, I could continue down this road, right? If he wasn't there, that's going to cost me 2 more, right? Because 1 for the road, 1 for the zone of control. So I could move that far if he was there. Note, I can never move into a hex containing an enemy unit. Verboten. Best I can ever do is be adjacent to it, right? So that's how you calculate movement, right? Some of these guys you'll notice up here, these are motorized units. So corrected, mechanized units. So if I come here and I want them to move into, so if I want, say, this unit to move into a mountain hex, I'll come into my terrain effects chart. No, terrain effects chart. And I will look, okay, mountain. I have a mechanized unit. Prohibited. Mechanized units cannot walk into mountains. Good to know. However, if there was a road there, it still would only cost them 1 point, right? I can make it through the mountains with a mechanized unit by sticking to the road, right? That overrides the prohibited in that case for this mechanized unit here that wants to move through these mountain passes. It's going to still cost me 1, right? I have this primary road that's half. I've just memorized that. You can look it up. Right, so I can actually move pretty further down these primary roads. And if let's see, a highway, that's going to be down here, this big red line, it's 1/3, right? So I can move 3 hexes for 1 point with my unit. This is important for both land units that want to move places and supply, because land supply runs on the movement rules. We'll talk about that more in depth in the land supply rules. But the thing to remember about movement is I need to know the hex I'm moving into. I need to know if there are any features, particularly minor river hex sites that I'm crossing, jungle, or roads. Roads replace how much it costs to move there as long as I keep following the road, right? So I can move, it's going to cost me 1 to move here, but if I want to move, so it's going to cost me 1 to move this unit here because it's on a road. If I want to move him here, I actually can't. That's now mountain, right? So I have to follow the road through the mountains to get that guy out. Until I get to hexes that have a movement value I can actually use with those guys. So remember, follow the roads if you want to get a lot of movement done quickly, because it turns out traveling on roads is really good. Otherwise, you're looking at the hex and how much it costs in that hex, which you can learn on the terrain effects chart. It's pretty helpful if you're going to do a lot of movement to really kind of just know how much it's going to cost, so you don't, you're not constantly referring to the chart. You'll actually learn really quickly. For the really common terrain and units in your AOR, you'll know it off the top of your head within a move or two. So keep those things in mind as we go through. Remember, zones of control matter, and remember that features do matter, and the terrain type matters. So when in doubt, refer to your terrain effects chart. It'll tell you how to move things, or how much things cost to move. All right, that's movement in a nutshell. just try moving things around. It'll become pretty obvious pretty quickly how things work as you do. So anyway, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. This has been a quick video about movement and how things move.